The world did not collapse into war in a single moment of madness. It unraveled gradually through calculated risks, broken promises, and the quiet normalization of aggression. Long before the first cities burned, the foundations of peace had already eroded. What followed was not an accident of history, but the consequence of hesitation meeting ambition. Europe in the late 1930s lived under the shadow of its own past. The memory of the First World War lingered in every capital, shaping decisions through fear rather than confidence. Entire societies had been traumatized by trench warfare, mass casualties, and economic ruin. Political leaders promised their people that such devastation would never return. Peace became not just a policy, but a moral obsession. It was this desperation to avoid conflict that created the perfect conditions for it to begin. In Germany, power had consolidated around a regime that rejected compromise and glorified expansion. Its leadership framed aggression as correction of borders, of history, of identity itself. When German troops crossed into neighboring lands without meeting resistance, the international response was cautious, restrained, and ultimately permissive. Diplomatic meetings replaced military opposition. Agreements were signed that sacrificed smaller nations in exchange for the hope of stability. Each decision sent a clear signal: force would be rewarded, not punished. That illusion shattered when German armies turned their attention eastward. The invasion of Poland was swift, coordinated, and overwhelming. It revealed a new form of warfare that shocked the world. Armored units moved faster than defenders could respond, supported by aircraft that dominated the skies and shattered communication lines. Infantry followed not on foot, but in vehicles, maintaining the pace of the advance. War was no longer static. It was fluid, relentless, and disorienting. As Poland collapsed under pressure from both west and east, Europe crossed a point of no return. Declarations of war followed, but action did not. For months, armies faced one another in uneasy silence. Many assumed that this conflict, like the last, would settle into predictable patterns of attrition. They were wrong. The battlefield had evolved, and only one side truly understood how. When the offensive resumed, it did so with stunning force. Neutral nations were bypassed or absorbed. Fortifications once believed impregnable were rendered useless. Entire armies were outmaneuvered rather than destroyed outright, trapped by speed and coordination instead of sheer numbers. Civilian populations fled ahead of advancing columns, carrying what they could as familiar landscapes transformed into corridors of war. The collapse of France sent shockwaves across the world. A nation long considered a pillar of European security fell in weeks. Its defeat was not merely military, but psychological. Leadership faltered, communication failed, and confidence dissolved. Across the Channel, Britain stood isolated, facing the possibility of invasion. Survival depended not on armies, but on pilots, radar stations, factories, and resolve. Above British cities and coastlines, the air war reached unprecedented intensity. Outnumbered defenders fought daily battles against waves of bombers and fighters. Victory was not measured in territory gained, but in endurance. Every aircraft repaired, every pilot returned to the sky became an act of resistance. When invasion plans were quietly abandoned, it marked a critical turning point. For the first time, the momentum of conquest slowed. Yet the war only widened. In the Mediterranean and North Africa, conflict spread across deserts and coastlines, pulling in new forces and new ambitions.
In the Balkans, campaigns unfolded with brutal efficiency, crushing resistance and securing strategic positions. Each success reinforced the belief that victory was inevitable. That belief would soon be tested. The decision to attack the Soviet Union transformed the war beyond recognition. What had been a continental struggle became a colossal confrontation between ideologies, armies, and entire populations. The scale defied comparison. Front lines stretched thousands of miles, cities became battlefields, villages disappeared. Millions were captured, killed, or displaced in a matter of months. Initial advances were devastating. Armored spearheads drove deep into enemy territory, encircling forces and capturing vast regions. But distance, climate, and resistance began to exact a toll. Supply lines strained, equipment failed, winter arrived without mercy. The expectation of a quick victory collapsed under the weight of reality. What followed was not simply military resistance, but national survival. The Soviet response was ruthless and uncompromising. Losses that would have shattered other nations were absorbed and replaced. Industry moved east. Civilians labored under unimaginable conditions. The front stabilized, then reversed. The war in the East became a grinding, merciless struggle where surrender was rare and survival uncertain. Atrocities multiplied as the conflict deepened. Prisoners were denied humanity. Civilians were exploited, displaced, or murdered. Entire communities were targeted for destruction. The war abandoned all pretense of restraint. It became total, ideological, and absolute. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched as the balance of the world shifted. Officially at peace, it was nonetheless drawn steadily closer to the conflict. Military leaders understood that geography alone would not guarantee safety. Advances in air power and naval warfare had erased distance as a shield. Preparation, once politically controversial, became increasingly urgent. The American military expanded cautiously at first. Resources were limited, equipment was outdated, training was uneven. But the foundations were laid for transformation. Factories shifted production, strategic planning intensified, new doctrines emerged, shaped by observation rather than experience. Material support flowed to nations already at war. Weapons, vehicles, and supplies crossed oceans in growing numbers. Naval forces patrolled contested waters, blurring the line between neutrality and involvement. Strategic decisions were made with the expectation that direct participation was no longer hypothetical. The expansion of the armed forces marked a profound shift. Millions were called to serve. Citizens became soldiers. Industry became an extension of the battlefield. Yet despite rapid growth, readiness lagged behind ambition. The army was larger, but not yet seasoned. The challenges ahead were immense. By the early 1940s, the character of the war was unmistakable. This was not a conflict that could be resolved through negotiation or limited engagement. It demanded total commitment. Victory would belong to those who could mobilize not just armies, but entire societies, economically, politically, and psychologically. The world stood at a crossroads, shaped by fear, resolve, and consequence. What began as calculated expansion had ignited a global struggle that would redefine power, morality, and survival. The coming years would determine not only who would prevail, but what kind of world would remain when the fighting finally stopped.